Speed has been cited as a factor in the one-car crash, but the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is checking for others. This picture of Walker next to the sports car was taken moments before the crash was taken.
On November 30th, 2013, Paul Walker, at just 40 years old, was gone. The impact of the news rippled outward with startling force, striking both Hollywood and the automotive world in a single disorienting moment. Fans grieved the loss of Brian O'Connor, the character who had come to symbolize speed, loyalty, and rebellion.
What's the fastest you've ever driven?
Just under 200. I did 197. I haven't broken 200 yet.
And you're trying to?
It's crazy. Oh yeah, I'll do it. It's the right car. Everything I have cars that put out plenty of power and everything. Well, what limits you is aerodynamic.
But beneath that public mourning, there remained a quieter truth that few fully understood. Paul Walker, away from the cameras, was a man whose connection to cars extended far beyond performance or image. In fact, when they opened Paul Walker's garage 12 years after his death, what they found left everyone speechless. The tragedy that took away everything. November 30th, 2013 began like any other Southern California day. Bright, deceptively calm. In the quiet suburb of Valencia, north of Los Angeles, Paul Walker was attending a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide, the disaster relief organization he had founded in 2010. The event was modest, almost understated, held at a business park where exotic cars sat lined up not for spectacle, but to draw attention to a cause. Typhoon Haiyan had devastated parts of the Philippines just weeks earlier, and Walker had been actively mobilizing resources. That morning, he was an organizer, greeting supporters, coordinating logistics, and planning the next phase of aid. People who were there later described him as focused, calm, and present. One attendee would recall he wasn't in a rush. He was talking to people, listening, making plans. You wouldn't think anything was wrong. The event itself was tied to Always Evolving, the performance shop he co-owned with Roger Rodas, a former professional race car driver and financial advisor. The two men shared more than business interests. That day, the gathering served as both a car meet and a fundraising effort. Publicly, his schedule was already packed. Filming for Furious 7 was underway. Production had been paused only briefly for the Thanksgiving holiday. Universal Pictures had invested heavily in the franchise. Walker's character, Brian O'Connor, remained central to its narrative arc. Off-screen, he had also been planning future relief missions. There was nothing about his trajectory that suggested an ending. Everything pointed forward. But then, it all came crashing down. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Walker left the event with Rodas. They got into Rodas's 2005 Porsche Carrera GT, powered by a 5.7-liter V10 engine producing 605 horsepower. The Carrera GT was not a forgiving machine. It demanded precision, respect, and constant control. As they pulled away, witnesses noted nothing unusual. The roads were dry. Traffic was light. The car accelerated onto Hercules Street, a relatively short industrial road not designed for high speeds. Within moments, the vehicle lost control, veering sharply before striking a concrete light pole and then a tree. The impact was catastrophic. The car split apart and erupted into flames almost instantly. Everything unfolded in seconds. A nearby business owner described hearing what sounded like a loud bang, like metal tearing apart, followed by a sudden fireball. First responders were called immediately. but the intensity of the blaze made rescue impossible. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrived to find the vehicle fully engulfed. One firefighter later recounted, "There was nothing we could do. The fire was too intense, too fast. It was already over." Both Walker and Rodas were pronounced dead at the scene. Autopsy reports later confirmed that Rodas died from multiple traumatic injuries, while Walker succumbed to the combined effects of trauma and thermal injuries. The official investigation would determine that speed was a primary factor, with estimates placing the car's velocity between 80 and 93 miles per hour in a 45 miles per hour zone. News of the crash spread rapidly, first through local reports, then across national and international media within hours. By evening, it had become global. Social media platforms were flooded with disbelief, tributes, and confusion. Walker, who had spent over a decade portraying a street racer navigating high-speed danger, had died in a real-world crash that felt eerily similar to the scenes that made him famous. Yet those who knew him understood the distinction. He was not reckless. He respected machines. He understood their limits. That contradiction only deepened the shock. A close friend later said, "He wasn't careless. He knew cars better than most people ever will. That's what makes it so hard to accept." As investigators worked to reconstruct the accident, attention turned to the Porsche Carrera GT itself. The car had a reputation, even among experienced drivers, for being difficult to control at high speeds, particularly without modern stability systems found in newer vehicles. The tire condition also became a focal point. Reports indicated that the car was running on older tires, potentially reducing grip and stability under acceleration. While no mechanical failure was officially cited as the cause, the combination of speed, road conditions, and vehicle characteristics created a scenario with little margin for error. Crash reconstruction experts emphasized how quickly control could be lost in such a car. One investigator noted, "At that speed, in that vehicle, once it steps out, there's almost no recovery space." Meanwhile, the human impact unfolded in parallel. Walker's family, including his daughter Meadow, faced the sudden void left behind. His Fast and Furious co-stars, many of whom had worked with him since 2001, responded with visible grief. Vin Diesel described him as a brother, while others spoke of his quiet generosity and grounded nature. Production on Furious 7 was halted indefinitely as the studio grappled with how to proceed. The film, already deep into shooting, required significant restructuring. Ultimately, the decision was made to complete Walker's remaining scenes using a combination of CGI and body doubles, including his brothers Caleb and Cody Walker. The film would go on to become a global success, grossing over $1.5 billion worldwide. But its emotional core was forever shaped by the circumstances of his death. One eyewitness who arrived shortly after the impact described the scene with stark clarity. The heat was overwhelming. You couldn't get close. People were shouting, but there was nothing anyone could do. Another recalled the eerie stillness that followed the initial chaos, the way the flames consumed everything with a kind of finality that left no room for intervention. There had been no warning, no gradual decline, no chance for intervention. Just a moment, and then nothing. In the weeks that followed, memorials appeared across the globe. Fans gathered at the crash site in Valencia, leaving flowers, candles, and messages. Car enthusiasts organized tribute drives, social media became a digital archive of remembrance, filled with clips, quotes, and personal stories. Yet beneath the public mourning, there remained a quieter, more enduring realization. Paul Walker's life had been defined not just by the roles he played, but by the way he lived, with intention, with curiosity, and with a genuine commitment to others. His work with Reach Out Worldwide continued, carried forward by those he had inspired. The tragedy that took him was sudden, violent, and irreversible. It erased plans, interrupted projects, left behind questions that could never be fully answered. But it also revealed the depth of a life that had extended far beyond the screen. Walker's private garage, hidden in plain sight within an unassuming industrial block in Valencia, California, stood a garage almost no one had truly noticed, and even fewer could have guessed was owned by Paul Walker. On the surface, it gave nothing away: flat gray walls, no branding, no polished signage or glass facades hinting at anything extraordinary within. To anyone passing by, it blended seamlessly into the quiet monotony of warehouses lining that stretch of road. But behind those heavy rolling doors, something far more personal was unfolding. This was where Walker's obsession with cars lived and breathed, far from cameras, far from the noise of fame. It wasn't a curated showroom or a place designed for admiration. It was intimate, a sanctuary built purely for the craft. When the world finally became aware of it following Walker's devastating death on November 30th, 2013, alongside his close friend and business partner Roger Rodas, the space had already spent nearly 10 years evolving into something deeply significant. Stepping inside revealed a collection that felt almost unreal in its scale and character. More than 30 vehicles occupied the vast interior, arranged in tight, deliberate rows beneath covers, tarps, and a lingering scent of oil, rubber, and time. Some cars looked as if they had been resting for years. Their tires softened slightly, a fine layer of dust settling across their surfaces like a quiet pause. Others told a different story, caught mid-transformation, chassis exposed, engines removed, projects frozen in motion, waiting for hands that would never return. It was alive, in progress, a reflection of a man who loved the process as much as the result. Walker's automotive taste was wide-ranging, almost borderless. Japanese engineering stood shoulder to shoulder with European precision and American raw power. A Nissan R34 Skyline GTR Spec 5, forever tied to his cinematic legacy, sat within reach of a heavily modified Toyota Supra that echoed his most iconic on-screen machine, yet existed entirely outside the lens. Nearby, a Nissan 370Z from Fast 5 rested quietly, another subtle reminder that his connection to these cars extended far beyond acting. These weren't props to him. They were machines he understood intimately, down to the smallest mechanical detail, the feel of torque building, the precise moment a turbocharger came alive. His BMW lineup alone could have defined the entire collection. 7 rare E36 M3 lightweights, with only 130 ever produced, stood in disciplined formation like a team ready for the track. Alongside them were a BMW 850 CSI, the iconic BMW M1, and a touring Alpina, each maintained with a level of care that bordered on reverence. American muscle held its ground just as strongly. A Ford Mustang GT 500 shared space with an SVT Cobra R, multiple Celine builds, and timeless Chevrolets, including a Camaro, a Corvette C1, and an Impala SS. European luxury and performance added another layer of depth. A Ferrari Testarossa rested beneath its cover, understated yet unmistakable, while a lineup of Porsches, from the classic 911 to the 930 Turbo and 996 variants, occupied an entire section. Among them, a Rolls-Royce Ghost stood out in quiet authority, wrapped in a matte blue finish that alone carried a staggering cost, its base value already pushing into the realm of exclusivity. The collection didn't stop at speed and luxury. Off-road capability had its place too, with a Jeep Wrangler and a Mercury Monterey, alongside a lone Audi B5 S4 completing the diverse lineup. Brief footage from 2012, filmed by the Smoking Tire, had offered fleeting glimpses of this space, but at the time, its true ownership remained unknown. Only after Walker's passing did the full reality emerge, leaving even those closest to him stunned. Cars, once assumed to be temporary movie assets, were, in truth, deeply personal pieces of a life lived through machines. Yet, the garage was more than the sum of its cars. Personal touch. Walker's hands-on passion. Paul Walker didn't just admire cars, he lived inside them, mentally and physically, in a way that blurred the line between driver, engineer, and storyteller. While the world knew him as the face behind the wheel in The Fast and the Furious, that image barely scratched the surface of what cars meant to him. His private garage in Valencia, California, was where that deeper connection unfolded, far removed from film sets and public attention. More than 30 vehicles sat inside an unmarked industrial space, absent of any showroom polish or performative display. This was not a place built to impress. It was a retreat, a working environment, a deeply personal arena where Walker could lose himself in the mechanical language he understood best. Each car wasn't just owned, it was experienced, documented, and remembered. Hidden throughout the interiors, in glove compartments, center consoles, and tucked-away corners, were dozens of handwritten notes. Some read like engineering blueprints, filled with exact suspension calibrations, alignment figures, and carefully calculated shift points. Others felt quieter, more reflective, capturing fleeting impressions of how a car responded, how it moved, how it felt beneath him. In a Nissan Skyline R34 GTR, a small note written in blue ink stood apart, addressed to his daughter, Meadow Walker, carrying a simple but heartfelt promise about teaching her to drive the car he loved most. Many of the vehicles weren't finished products, but ongoing evolutions, proof that Walker didn't just collect machines. He engaged with them, reshaped them, and built relationships with them over time. A Datsun 240Z stood elevated on jack stands, stripped back to its bare shell, its engine bay empty in preparation for a swap that had been carefully planned but never realized. Every removed component was meticulously labeled in Walker's handwriting. The interior pieces, dashboard, seats, carpeting, all placed aside with deliberate care, resting on protective blankets. On the driver's seat lay a small notebook, its pages filled with side-by-side engine comparisons, each option broken down into advantages and trade-offs, as if he were mapping out the car's future with quiet precision. Friends would later recall that this 240Z was meant to become his next daily driver. Something personal, something he would shape entirely on his own terms. It wasn't destined for display. It was meant to be lived with, refined, and understood over time. That same hands-on philosophy extended across the garage. A classic 1960s Ford Mustang carried a strip of masking tape across its dashboard, scrawled with a list of tasks, some crossed out, others left incomplete, as though he had simply stepped away with every intention of returning. Beneath the steering column, a partially soldered wiring harness hung in place, exposed copper catching the cold glow of overhead lights. Tools were arranged perfectly. Wrenches were ordered by size, screwdrivers aligned by type, and everything positioned with the precision of someone who respected the process as much as the outcome. Inside his BMWs, more notes appeared, detailing subtle differences in ride quality, handling feedback, and the unique personality of each car. In one M3 lightweight, a line stood out with a kind of finality. This might be the cleanest one left. Don't ever let it go. Across the entire collection, Walker documented everything. Shift points for specific tracks, cornering speeds, tire behavior under load, and suspension adjustments refined through repeated drives. It read less like casual ownership and more like ongoing experimentation. In Skylines, Supras, and even an M3, scraps of paper captured late-night observations, the way a turbocharger built pressure, the slight shift in balance through a turn, the responsiveness of a chassis under delicate steering inputs. Some notes drifted beyond mechanics, becoming almost meditative, describing the sensation of speed, the grounded weight of the car against the road, the quiet thrill of an engine fully alive. These weren't meant for anyone else. They were private thoughts, written in still moments, long after the engine had been shut off, as the ticking of cooling metal echoed through the silence. What lingered most heavily after Walker's passing in November 2013 was how much of it remained unfinished. Engines sat removed, interiors left open, wiring paused mid-connection. That Mustang still carried its taped list, tasks frozen in time, waiting for hands that would never return. And yet, nothing felt abandoned. Every incomplete build, every open notebook, every folded note left behind spoke of a life lived with precision, curiosity, and an almost intimate connection to the machines he loved. The scattered pages, the half-completed swaps, the carefully labeled parts, all told the story of long nights spent under lifts, hands marked with grease, chasing perfection in compression ratios and braking balance. It revealed someone who approached engineering with careful discipline, yet never lost the sense of wonder that first drew him in. But wait, there's more. Business entanglement, always evolving. Beyond the immaculate rows of BMWs, Nissan Skylines, Supras, and Ferraris, there was something far less visible, but just as significant, shaping the collection. A layered corporate framework known as always evolving. The high-performance motorsports company Paul Walker built alongside his close friend and business partner, Roger Rodas. What appeared, at first glance, to be a deeply personal garage was also something more structured, more calculated. It functioned not only as a private retreat, but as a secured repository of high-value automotive assets, all managed under a system that was efficient in life, yet deeply complicated in death. Always Evolving wasn't simply a passion project. It was a fully operational business, offering tuning, restoration, and performance services, particularly focused on exotic builds and Japanese domestic market vehicles. At the same time, it quietly acted as a holding entity for some of the rarest and most valuable cars Walker owned. Several key vehicles, including a Nissan R34 Skyline GTR Spec 5, a highly modified Toyota Supra, and multiple BMW E36 M3. Lightweight models were not registered under Walker's personal name, but instead held within the company itself. For years, this structure worked without friction. The corporate layer provided clarity and protection. Ownership could be tracked, insurance handled with precision, and import regulations navigated through proper channels. It allowed Walker to build his collection without constantly confronting the bureaucratic hurdles that often come with rare and internationally sourced vehicles. But everything changed in an instant. When Walker and Rodas lost their lives in the high-speed crash in Valencia, California, on November 30, 2013, the very system that once provided order quickly unraveled. Almost immediately, questions of ownership surfaced. Vehicles that were assumed to belong to Walker personally were, on paper, tied to Always Evolving. Others existed in shared ownership with Rodas, who had been driving his Porsche Carrera GT at the time of the crash. The situation grew even more tangled when the legal status of certain imported vehicles came into focus. Some cars, particularly the Nissan Skylines, had entered the United States through narrow compliance pathways, navigating strict federal import laws that only allowed limited exceptions for non-U.S. specification models. At the time of Walker's death, some of these vehicles were fully legalized, others were in the process of compliance. A few had never completed the process at all. Within days of the accident, vehicles collectively valued at approximately £1.4 million, many of them co-owned by Walker and Rodas, were removed from the garage and listed for sale. Claims began to surface rapidly. Former associates stepped forward, asserting stakes in the collection. Creditors emerged, some with documented agreements, others relying on verbal claims that were difficult to verify. The quiet, controlled environment Walker had built was suddenly transformed into a legal battleground, filled with contested ownerships, conflicting narratives, and mounting tension. What followed was a prolonged legal conflict that expanded to nearly $18 million in complexity and scale. Lawyers sifted through layers of paperwork, corporate filings, vehicle titles, import documentation, and even handwritten notes left behind in the garage, attempting to reconstruct the true ownership of each asset. Over time, some resolution began to take shape. Meadow Walker and her family were able to reclaim a portion of the collection, particularly after a 2016 settlement that returned several of the most meaningful vehicles to the estate. This ensured that at least part of Walker's legacy remained intact, rather than being entirely fragmented and sold off. Even so, not everything could be recovered. Some cars were auctioned, dispersed to new owners, while others lingered in unresolved legal states, tied up in incomplete records or ongoing disputes. Each transaction, each ruling, highlighted just how dramatically the meaning of the garage had shifted. What had once been a private world of craftsmanship and exploration had become a high-stakes arena of financial and legal maneuvering. And yet, beneath all the conflict, the original purpose of always evolving still mattered. The structure had allowed Walker to manage an extraordinarily diverse collection with precision and freedom. It gave him access to insurance frameworks, import channels, and organizational control, all while preserving the ability to remain hands-on with every machine. Invisible to the outside world, it was this very system that enabled him to build, refine, and connect with his cars on his own terms. Cars for a cause. Paul Walker's connection to cars was never just about performance or aesthetics. It carried intention. It carried purpose. What looked like a private obsession was, in truth, something far more layered, where mechanical passion quietly intertwined with a commitment to helping others. His garage was not only a workshop or a collection, it was an extension of that philosophy, a space where engineering met empathy, where horsepower was meant to translate into something meaningful beyond the road. At the center of this vision stood Reach Out Worldwide, the nonprofit he founded in 2010, built to respond swiftly to natural disasters and deliver aid where it was needed most. Within the stillness of his garage, that mission was etched into the smallest details. Between rows of polished metal and half-finished builds, there were handwritten notes, labeled compartments, and messages tucked into glove boxes, each outlining plans for charity auctions, fundraising events, and logistical strategies. A modified Toyota Supra carried a note marking it for a future benefit, while a Boss 302 Mustang held carefully written projections, estimated valuations, potential venues, and intended recipients, all mapped out in Walker's unmistakably precise handwriting. These were not passing ideas or symbolic gestures. They were plans in motion, grounded in action, waiting to be carried out. Walker didn't see these cars as static objects meant for admiration. He saw them as instruments, capable of generating real-world impact. In his mind, a Supra or a Mustang could become more than a machine. It could become medical supplies delivered to a disaster zone, homes rebuilt after devastation, or resources placed directly into the hands of those struggling to recover. His commitment to this work was not distant or delegated. It was direct. In 2010, when a catastrophic earthquake tore through Haiti, Walker didn't remain behind the scenes. He was there, on the ground, not as an observer, but as a participant, driving trucks loaded with food, water, and medical aid into areas larger organizations often struggled to access. He worked without ceremony, slept wherever space allowed, and ensured others were fed before he ever considered himself. It was not about visibility, it was about presence. That same mindset carried forward in 2013 when a powerful typhoon devastated parts of the Philippines. Once again, Walker arrived not as a figurehead, but as part of a working team, covered in mud, moving debris, and lifting supplies. He blended into the effort alongside volunteers and locals who often had no idea who he was. He avoided distance. He avoided spectacle. Even something as simple as wearing gloves felt unnecessary to him. He wanted to feel the work, to understand its weight, to be fully immersed in it. For Walker, action was always the point. Recognition never was. That philosophy extended seamlessly into the garage he left behind. Vehicles marked for auctions or charity events were never meant to remain idle. They were intended to transform motion into relief, converting speed into support for those in crisis. The Supra set aside for a fundraiser, the Mustang, with its detailed auction roadmap, even unfinished builds waiting for completion, all reflected a singular idea: that passion could be redirected outward, that something personal could become something profoundly impactful. The mark he left through this approach was subtle, yet deeply felt. Those who encountered him during relief efforts in Haiti, in the Philippines, remember not a celebrity, but a man who worked alongside them without hierarchy or distance, someone who showed up, contributed, and moved on without expectation. The vehicles in his collection carried that same quiet intention. His garage, filled with rare machines, personal notes, and projects, paused mid-progress, stood as a reflection of a life built on more than recognition or success. It spoke of discipline, of curiosity, and of a genuine desire to help. It revealed a balance where adrenaline and compassion coexisted, where precision engineering sat comfortably beside humanitarian purpose, and where even the smallest actions, a handwritten plan, a tightened bolt, a truck driven through broken terrain, could ripple outward in ways that truly mattered. Yet that vision was interrupted before it could fully unfold. The crash in Valencia that took his life, along with Roger Rodas, left everything suspended, as if time itself had stopped mid-motion. When access to the garage was eventually granted to his estate and legal team, what they found was not just a collection of vehicles, but a snapshot of intention paused. More than 30 cars remained, some intact, others disassembled, many still in the middle of transformation, surrounded by handwritten instructions, open notebooks, and incomplete to-do lists that hinted at what was meant to come next. A Datsun 240Z stood stripped and waiting for an engine swap, its possible configurations laid out in careful comparison across notebook pages. A muscle car still carried masking tape notes across its dashboard, partially completed tasks left untouched. Wiring remained mid-connection. Tools sat in perfect order, as if the work had only been briefly paused. It felt less like abandonment and more like interruption, a conversation left unfinished. Even the legal aftermath that followed could not erase the intent embedded within that space. Many of the vehicles had been held under Always Evolving, the performance and motorsports company Walker co-founded with Rodas, creating layers of complexity around ownership. What followed were disputes, contested claims, and a highly publicized legal battle, valued at around $18 million, threatening to reduce something deeply personal into technical documentation and courtroom arguments. Yet, despite these challenges, part of his vision endured. In 2020, Barrett Jackson auctioned 21 vehicles from the estate in Scottsdale, Arizona, generating more than $2.3 million. Other cars were retained by his family or quietly transferred, preserving a connection to both his personal legacy and the ongoing work of Reach Out worldwide. Beyond the figures and legal proceedings, the deeper meaning remained intact. The garage continued to reflect who he was: methodical, driven, generous, and intensely private. It wasn't the monetary value of the cars that defined the space, but the human story woven through them. Notes written in blue ink, tucked into hidden compartments, some addressed to his daughter Meadow, revealed a man thinking beyond himself, considering what he would leave behind. that legacy continues to move forward. Reach Out Worldwide still operates today, carrying the same hands-on philosophy Walker embodied. The vehicles that were auctioned have already contributed to causes he cared about, while those that remain, whether restored or still incomplete, offer a rare, unfiltered look into his world. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.